Good evening, and welcome to our first launch community conversation. My name is Taj Wallace, and I will be your host this evening. Tonight's launch community conversation will be a spotlight on childcare. Launch has become a well known staple in the Seattle area. For more than 40 years, our nonprofit organization has collaborated with families, schools, and community partners to engage children and prepare them for school and life success. Our preschool, before and after school programs and summer opportunities provide learning and care for children ages 3 to 12. As of 2021, Launch has evolved with the changing landscape of childcare over the decades. Tonight, we have a panel that represents the past, present, and future of Launch. Each of these remarkable leaders represents the Launch values, which are honor, safety, balance, excellence, engagement, and inclusiveness. Allow me to introduce our panel for the evening. First, we have the remarkable Dr. Angela Griffin with us this evening. Angela is a visionary and inspirational leader who just celebrated her 1 year anniversary as the CEO for Launch. She has over 27 years of experience, primarily focused on the development and implementation of early learning, childcare, and youth development programs. Angela has a reputation for building strong relationships and partnerships, inspiring teams to action, and crafting effective strategies to ensure children, youth, and communities equitably access all the available opportunities leading to successful life outcomes. Before joining Launch, Angela led a variety of organizations in the development and implementation of programs and services that have scaled nationally. She has served on a variety of boards, including formerly the Federal Way School Board and currently the King County Children and Youth Advisory Board, the Washington State Leadership Board, the Youth Development Executives of King County, the Child Care Aware of Washington, King County Early Learning Coalition, and the Woodland Park Zoo. She holds a bachelor's in human services and a master's in education, both from California State University. She also holds a doctorate in educational and organizational leadership from Seattle University. She is the parent of 3 adult children and 1 preteen, as well as the grandmother of an adorable toddler. Let's give a big welcome to Dr. Angela Griffin. Next, having recently represented us from Olympia, we have the extraordinary Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley here with us this evening. Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley is a mother, educator, wife, and neighbor here in the 37th Legislative District. She was first elected to the legislature in 2020 and serves on the Children, Youth, and Families Committee as the vice chair, as well as the Environment and Energy and Finance Committees. She has lived in the 37th Legislative District since 2004, and it was here in the Rainier Valley where she found her voice for activism. She and her husband, Jason, are proud to raise their 2 children in Hillman City, as there is no place they'd rather call home. The 37th Legislative District is a place where people live with a sense of authenticity and purpose, and where we all work together and support each other. And that is what we need to make change in this moment. Representative Harris-Talley has spent over 20 years building powerful movements for change in our region and statewide. From philanthropy to nonprofit work, reproductive rights, and housing justice. The more she worked for and with our communities, the more she saw that our basic needs not being met. As a legislator, she committed to bringing community power and meaningful representation on the state level to solve the biggest issues in our district, including the urgent needs for childcare. Welcome, Representative Harris-Talley. Up next, we have the amazing Brianna Jackson with us this evening. Brianna has been in the early learning and youth development field for over 20 years, serving in a number of roles in the greater Seattle community. Her passion for relationship building and community engagement has been in the foundation for her approach to her work. Brianna recognizes the power in communities coming together to make change and what can happen when community is put first. Brianna strongly believes that in creating solutions for the socioeconomic issues of our time, we need to include those most impacted. Previous to joining the Stolte Family Foundation, Brianna served for the past 6 years as the executive director of Launch. At Launch, she developed close ties with the business community, foundations, and individual donors to advance their mission. She worked hard to include all voices in order to communicate and execute an organizational vision. Brianna also has extensive experience working collaboratively with various levels of government and partnering with numerous nonprofits to develop ensuring positive relationships and connect people from diverse backgrounds while building community consensus. She is a proud Seattle native and mom of 2 beautiful children who keep her motivated to continue to use her voice to advocate for Washington's children and families. Brianna lives with her husband and kids in Renton and loves to spend time with her family, traveling and enjoying all the beautiful things Washington has to offer. Thanks for joining us, Brianna. And last, we have the outstanding Dr. Shukri Olow with us this evening. Dr. Olow is a mother, a community organizer, and a candidate for King County District Number 5, covering the cities of Kent, SeaTac, Tukwila, Burien, Normandy Park, Des Moines, and Renton. For the last 14 years, she has directly served the residents of South King County, working on a variety of issues, including housing, education, and human services. She mentors youth through several programs, pushing the systems from the outside so that we can all get to collective liberation. She previously worked at Neighborhood House, Seattle Housing Authority, Seattle Public Schools, and currently works with the Best Starts for Kids initiative with King County. In addition to serving on several boards like the Kent Youth and Family Services, Kent YMCA, One America Votes, Somali Health Board, she is passionate about creating a pipeline for young people to access opportunities and provide exposure to new experiences. Welcome, Dr. Olow. Before we jump into our panel discussion, I would like to ask our audience to place your questions and answers for our panels in the chat. We will have time for a Q&A session at the end of the discussion. So ladies, are you ready? Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. Our first question will be focusing on your experience with childcare. Brianna, would you like to share your experience with childcare?
Yes, I would love to. And I first just want to say thank you to Launch for having me here. Any excuse that I can have to to show up for Launch, I'm there. So I'm excited to be here and excited to be in space with these amazing leaders in our community on this panel. So thank you to all of you. So yeah, my connection and experience with childcare, it started very early. My mother was an early learning childcare educator and provider for over 30 years in the Seattle community. So very early on, I was exposed to the impact that a childcare provider really can have on a family and community. I have very fond memories of many days and many summer breaks immersed in this rich environment. And I really grew to appreciate the time and the effort and the talent that it takes to create a welcoming and inclusive environment for children. I saw firsthand that a childcare provider can truly become an extension of one's family, right? And my mother and her staff and her teachers, they weren't just caregivers, but they really were important figures in the lives of families. They saw families through all their ups and downs, and yet they were always there providing this consistency that was safe and that was nurturing. And, you know, thinking back on this question, I was like, wow, the connections that my mother made with those that she served really are still present in our lives and in my life. Today, I babysat many a children on many a weekend back in the day. And those children have children now, and I actually serve some of those children in Launch. So it feels very full circle. At 18 years of age, I, was thinking, what am I going to do with my time in summers in between, college? And I decided to continue working with children, and I absolutely fell in love even more with the opportunity to be in the same space with young people. So I ended up working at Launch and ended up being at Launch for over 20 years as a teacher, director. I worked in operations for a while as executive director and also as a former Launch parent. And so within those 20 years, I became a parent of 2. And I valued even more the access to high quality care as a working family, childcare was not only necessary, but a really welcome partner in this wild ride, right? Called parenthood. And so I, just really learned to appreciate even more from once I became a parent. Now in my current role at Stolte, it really includes looking at the whole ecosystem of education, and critical part of that ecosystem is childcare and the role that it plays socially and economically in Washington State. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. I love how you talked about important figures coming from childcare providers. There are not just caretakers. They truly will stay with you for a lifetime. I definitely have the privilege of still knowing my daycare teachers, and they're still alive. So I definitely respect that. Thank you so much. Does anyone else on the panel would like to give us your thoughts surrounding your childcare experience?
Yes, I just so enamored with the legacy of this type of care that your family has had, Brianna, and just also honored to be here. Thank you, Launch, for inviting me. It's interesting to be a lawmaker and get to shape and make decisions, but to also bring your lived experience to that. So I have now 5th grader and 1st grader as of this week, who go to public school right in our community at Hawthorne Elementary. And we're very blessed that Launch is actually one of many programs offered at Hawthorne. And before that, right, like I had been through all the things I've experienced that anyone, particularly in Seattle and throughout Washington State, it's not just isolated to Seattle, had with childcare, which is having my baby, being told while I was even still pregnant, you better figure out where you want childcare, you better get on a list, running around all over the city to places that didn't necessarily reflect the cultural needs I knew our family have, or even the financial feasibility that our family have, but just trying to get on every list I could with the hope that we would have some options once our child was here in the world. And not necessarily having a conduit where I felt like I was immersed in community with childcare options, right? And I'm not unique in this. I think I love what you said, Brianna, about that a childcare provider can be an extension of your family. It's about finding the right fit for your family. So I felt so blessed, one, to be at Hawthorne, a truly diverse school with Black women leaders who truly care about whole families being part of our school system, and to have Launch as an extension of that. And part of it was about, I'm a working parent with another working co-parent. We're at work more than with our families, and our children, quite frankly, are in school and childcare more than they're with their families. So who is caring for our children is so essential. And what I have experienced with programs like Launch, and we have programs similar to Launch in this lens throughout the 37th district, is folks who are from the community, who understand the dynamics and needs of our families, models that create flexibility. So parents who need full-time have full-time, parents who need 3 days a week, that flexibility and understanding of the breadth of our lives. But I also know I'm extraordinarily privileged to have access to childcare. So with that lens of my lived experience as a decision maker, I'm also looking at, and where are the families who are falling through the gaps, who don't have what I was offered as options, who need more funding and support. So I'm really excited to talk more tonight about what we're doing right and how to expand it more and make sure every child and family has it. So I'm really excited for the conversation.
Great. I'm happy to go next, though I'm not sure why I'm following Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley here, but my name is Shukri, and I really love that question. First, I want to actually thank you all so much for the opportunity to connect and to be in this space with just incredible leaders and also incredible Black women. I'm super excited to just be in community with you all. I think my sort of story into childcare began when I was born in Somalia. I'm the eldest of 3, and I think entire dissertations could be written about the responsibilities and the burdens that immigrant daughters, maybe even firstborn immigrant daughters, sort of shoulder at a very young age. And so I was originally born in Somalia, and my father died when I was about 4 years old, and I had 2 younger siblings, and I remember caring for them. I remember, cleaning after them. I remember cooking for them, although they would say the food wasn't that great. It's fine. I'm over it now. But I remember being that nurturer, that caretaker at a very young age, and still, sort of in that role right now. And also as a parent of two young folks, 9 and 11, I remember the journey that, our family had, especially when they were just born. And I didn't even understand sort of the landscape of childcare and what programs were offered and how many slots were available to families and the cost, especially as a working parent. I was younger at that time. And so I remember that struggle, but I think fortunately too, I carry a sense of privilege in that, my ethnic culture is sort of communal, right? And so I had my mother and their grandmother and my sister and my cousins and a community of people to sort of help raise these two young people that are now navigating, life here in the States. And so, and now I'm sort of in this interesting sort of position as a candidate for county council, talking about issues of access to childcare. I started my campaign talking with childcare providers, actually about 50 of them back in September when I initially announced, many of them being East African women, many of them being Somali women in South King County, many of them, receiving subsidies from the state, and we're struggling before COVID, right? And now are even more kind of trying to figure out what resources exist and how to stay afloat. Many of them love this position that they're in, right, of caring and nurturing and loving on our children, on our scholars, but are, I think, experiencing a really difficult time right now in light of COVID as well. And so just a kind of an interesting story, I'm talking about these issues. Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley mentioned lived experience, right? And so it's a different type of leadership, right? When you have been impacted, the issues that you're talking about, whether it's childcare or housing or education or whatever the issue is. And so yesterday morning, I was doing an interview at like 7 a.m. And luckily it was with a women's sort of led organization. And so they understood what was happening in the background, but my children kept coming in every like 5 minutes and everything sort of seemed like an emergency. It was like, did you know that when you take a nap, you can get a headache, right? Those sorts of things. And I'm like in an endorsement interview back and forth with like 7 other people. And I was thinking to myself before this event, well, what if I had access to childcare as a candidate, right? And so just kind of a good reflection point for me leading up to this conversation that there is a huge need for childcare in our community. And it's not just about access to childcare, it's also about utilization, right? It's about culturally responsive, childcare in our communities that honors the different, traditions and value systems that people bring into those spaces. It's about expanding the workforce, right? It's about creating a pathway for the workers within the childcare sector. And so there's so many things that, I want to share with you all, but I'll stop there and I'll toss it over to Dr. Griffin.
I would say I love the way you all were talking about the variety of childcare services that are essential to families, right? And so, from my perspective, being able to see that some families are relying on their grandparents or aunts or uncles or the neighbor next door to take care of their children. Some prefer to have their children in family home centers, while others prefer to have their children in center-based childcare, whether that's early learning or extended learning beyond the school day. And Launch has been fortunate to provide that early learning care and that school age care in school buildings and in community centers. But what I'd say the pandemic really exposed is that there needs to be additional varieties and opportunities for our families to be able to engage with their children, right? And not everyone can has access to a nanny or a pod or other programs, but that Launch showed up as essential this school year over the past year for families who needed care in the specific way that it's been designed and in the specific way that we offer it. And I think that's how I see childcare, essential in the way that families needed and children will be able to develop and grow.
Well, thank you, panelists, for answering the question. Really good feedback. I love hearing about your experiences for sure. So we're going to go ahead on with the next question. And the next question is, what is your impact? Does your current impact affect your current work on the childcare sector? Representative Harris-Talley, would you like to share your experience with us?
Absolutely. Yes. I think this is such an essential question. And, for decisions that we made at the state level this year, we made some really big decisions about that infrastructure and what it is to support the entire infrastructure of childcare. We had the biggest priority for childcare policy we've ever had in Washington state history this year. It was a comprehensive bill. And I loved what you said, Dr. Griffin, about, right, like where childcare happens matters, who's providing it matters, how they're supported so they can provide it matters. And so this bill really was on all those axes. We also had a really unique year in that we also had federal dollars that came into the state. So we didn't have to talk about so often, unfortunately, what we talk about at the state level, which is cutting services. We actually got to have conversations about fully funding and expanding services. And that is the conversation we should be having all day, every day. And I say that because the lens I have, right, is that where I live is a community in the Columbia City, Rainier Valley, is a diverse community. I need childcare that's going to be responsive to that. Our neighbors need anti-racist approaches, right? Anti-biased approaches to childcare. Someone who sees every child and what their cultural needs are, who understands the balance of barriers that families have at any given point with intersecting issues, right? That get them to childcare or not, transportation, hunger, all those things. The model that Launch has, I think, is a really great model for other areas to think through. Where are the places that families already gather and already have community that childcare can then be linked to? And the promise of the policy that we have at the state level is what local communities do now with that policy. And so my hope is that we'll continue to see in that infrastructure and all of that where childcare is happening, but a clear attention to who's providing the care. I can't say that enough. Affordability in childcare should not be at the sacrifice of workers having care and benefits and all that they need. So that's really essential to me, that all those intersectional pieces be aligned and together, because I've experienced as a parent what it is when it's not and where those gaps come up. And I have never, I think, met anyone more creative than folks in the childcare sector. The way childcare responded to the pandemic and wrapped care, like I just had a meeting with some folks at Daybreak Center, and they talked about really innovative models for how to continue preschool there and how to bridge it into online school for their kindergartners. So just an innovative place where I feel like policy, we just need to follow y'all's lead and do it. So I know folks here know what it looks like to build it. And once it's built, folks come. So we just need to keep building it and building it better in response to what community says they need.
Well, what's interesting is that was what was powerful about this legislative session, different than others. And I mean, I'm blaming everything on the pandemic right now, but our legislators listened in a different way, right? Like, really, we're looking to community for solutions. And so when we said this is what children need, this is what childcare needs to look like, this is what the gap has been for a long time. The gap didn't just start now, but this is what the financial gap has looked like, and the inequity in pay for our staff looks like. Our legislators actually listened and wrote it the way we said it needs to be written, the bills, the use our language and so forth. And I remember actually it was one of the calls I was on with you, Representative Harris-Talley, was a opportunity to listen. And when you were listening and a couple of other representatives around our county were listening, it was through this lens of being a parent. right? And it was like, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember you saying, I know what you're talking about because my kids were at launch, right? I know exactly what you're talking about. And so it became a heart issue. It became from a place of compassion, which was transformational in this recent legislative session. And I think it was you, Dr. Olow, and I'll give you credit if it was. If it wasn't, you could tell me. But there was someone recently out campaigning or talking about campaigning and being in some of the forum groups and questioning when legislators were not talking about children and were not centering children, and that there's something fundamentally wrong in everything draws back to our children, the funding, the environment, the jobs, they all draw back to our children as the foundation, and that's critical. It was very critical and showed up in a transformational way in this past legislative session. So thank you.
I love that word transformational, because I'll just keep going on that, because I feel like that's absolutely what we've seen. And for so many of us, right, in the field for so long have been saying, this is what's going to make a difference for children and families. And, Representative Harris-Talley, as you said, it's like the policy just needs to match up with the wisdom and the rich expertise that exists in the field, right? And so those things coming together in this last session has been really beautiful to watch. And I think that, part of my work now is focusing on and moving more deeply to focus on those strong system pieces, right? And knowing that really providers and families are constantly faced with challenges that impact their work and their lives really due to poor policy, right? And so I think being part of sort of that policy reform, being partners sort of in that work is something I know I get really excited about, and at our foundation we get really excited about. But it also feels like it's a moment that we're in. Like, what are we going to do with this moment? What are we going to do with this time? And it does also feel like, just from a foundation perspective, hearing sort of conversations in the philanthropy field, like it's a moment too where private dollars, right, could need to step up and show up and be part of public dollars coming together to support children and families. And I think it can look in like so many different ways. Like I get excited when I hear about coalitions that are forming to bring families to decision-making tables, or organizations that are working to provide tools and resources for providers to be the advocates that they are, or focus efforts on policy, right? Policy building regarding workforce development. I think that's been mentioned, right? Around our early learning and childcare workers, like having real salaries and wages they can live on, and benefits, right? Community and outreach and storytelling around early learning, issues. It's just really incredible. And I think, part of where I get really excited about is how can we sort of play a role in bringing experiences of the field to the forefront and our partners to the forefront, and, show up at tables. For me, it's like, where can I maybe show up at tables where I know my partners can't, but also where can I help to push for them to be at tables where they should be, right? So I think this is such a moment for all of us to really think about how we want to sustain these gains that we're seeing that are being made, and support in whatever way that we can. And I think this is such a time. This is such a time to really sort of come together and say, yes, this is what we've been wanting. This is what we've been asking for. And now, how do we keep that momentum going? How do we support the work moving forward?
I think we keep that momentum going by electing people like Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley. I mean, the change that has happened in the state leg this year happened because of Black women who were elected in 2020, right? Like, we know what happens when people who have lived experience in these powerful positions making decisions on behalf of their constituents, because they know these issues, from a firsthand experience, right? They've felt it, they've navigated the system, they know what happens to people when they are in that position. And so I just wanted to kind of add that. And then Dr. Griffin, I probably have said that, and if not, I'll take the credit anyway. Appreciate that comment. But, in Somali, we have this greeting when we see each other. And the greeting, I'll start first by sharing it in Somali and then English, but it's Iyalka seyihin, Iyalka seyihin. And it literally translates into, and how are the children? Not how are you, or how have you been, how's life? It's how are the children? And so that, I think, has been a central focus for me as an individual, but also on the campaign side, On a personal note too, my mother is a childcare provider. My mother opened an in-home family childcare business in 2009, has been in that, occupation for, quite a while, loves children, loves feeding them, loves educating them, loves working with them. I don't know how she does it, we're not talking one or two, multiple children, right? She has all the energy in the world because she truly cares about the work that she's doing. And that is, I think, every childcare provider who's in this this profession loves their work, right? They're passionate about, ensuring that we raise beautiful, children that are loved on and cared for and nurtured in all of the ways that they need to be nurtured, right? And so, to your question, Taj, about sort of what is the impact or the scope of the position that I'm running for. I'm running for King County Council District 5, which covers Kent, SeaTac, Tukwila, Berrien, Des Moines, Normandy Park, and Renton. I always have to count, like in my head, 7 cities in the district. And childcare is a key priority area for the campaign. I mean, there are 4 areas, it's investments in public health and human services, and affordable childcare, behavioral health, mental health is in that strategy. And so it has been a key issue because, one, I am a parent trying to figure out sort of how to talk about these issues while also running an entire campaign, while also caring for 2 children while we're in a global pandemic. And I know that there's plenty of, opportunities for the county to step up, right, and to model true leadership. I think the county has been sort of stagnant on many of these issues, and childcare is definitely one of those issues. I'm really happy about the expansion of Best Starts for Kids by adding 3,000 additional slots for childcare. And I know that there's great people within the county doing great work especially on this issue of access to childcare, but there's definitely more room to grow. And I hope that our impact includes expanding the workforce, providing things like reflective consultation for childcare providers who are often sort of the first response, to the needs of our families, right? Who are constantly sort of getting a variety of different, families who have multiple needs and trying to figure out like, what are the resources, like what are the gaps, and also might be kind of impacted by secondary trauma, right? And so what does a space look like for them that holds them, where they're able to vent, where they're able to reflect on their day? I think there's definitely more work to be done there. I think Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley also mentioned, or maybe it was Brianna, the wages, like worker wages within the childcare sector. There's high turnover, and it's because they're not, paid living wages, right? And so what more could the county do to be able to provide that additional boost? I mentioned also the question about childcare accessibility, right? Is it accessibility or is it about utilization, right? Like programs could be available all the time, but if people don't know how to navigate the system, if people don't have, others who speak their language, who, are from their culture, able to help them get connected to programs like Launch or, a family in-home childcare provider or what have you, then the issue is broad, right? It's no longer just about access, it's about are people actually getting connected to the things that they need and thinking through about that connection and what that looks like.
Thank you, ladies. Definitely good feedback, good answers. I do love the whole conversation of expanding services for diverse communities. Being someone here from Kent, I definitely feel like Kent could definitely see some expansion with services in the diverse communities. But I'm also proud of all of you for your work. Your impact is being witnessed, seen, and we truly appreciate all the work and effort that you've done. Definitely, we would love to see the policy match up to the wisdom, like Brianna said. But for sure, I know it's a good start, but we know we have more work to do in the future for sure. All right, let's go ahead and get into our next question. My next question is, what do you believe the landscape of childcare is at this time? Dr. Griffin, would you like to share your thoughts with us?
I will. And I first want to acknowledge, yes, Dr. Olow, it was you who said it, because now I remember the story. Would you mind saying one more time that greeting in Somalian?
Yes, in Somali, it's
Somali.
Iyalka. I'll type it in the chat too. It's Iyalka Seyihin. Iyalka Seyihin.
Yes. How are the children? That's the current landscape, right? How are the children? That's like what we need to be thinking about. And so at launch, we are currently in the process of finalizing revisions on our strategic plan. And we started by looking at the current landscape. And we were looking at it through 5 categories of our staff, our children, and families, the impact of COVID-19, the areas that we need to be involved in for advocacy, and then the need to sustain our work. And again, all centered around how are the children. And when we did that look as a staff team around the landscape that's impacting our children, it was mentioned earlier around the turnover in childcare, and that being a significant issue, mainly because of the way the pandemic hit. People are being able to live off of unemployment to a certain extent, versus having taking the wages that we're able to offer them in the childcare sector. So there's been advocacy and need to identify where we must advocate in our sector to ensure that we can provide our staff with living wages. And so that was a big part of the landscape view that we had. Also, we acknowledge that there's already an opportunity gap. There was already an academic achievement gap, but that is, I mean, we don't have the evidence yet. We need to get the evidence, but there's high probability that gap has broadened because of kids needing to learn remotely and the time that it took to get kids in our public school system up to speed on that learning experience. We've heard that homelessness has grown in our communities, and it's impacting our children and families deeply. The mental health challenges, oh my goodness, what we see and what we hear around how our children and our families are navigating mental health challenges and issues and needing more support to help them emotionally and psychologically as they've experienced a lot of change and loss and transition. And then the other piece has been the investments in childcare. And that's where, again, where a lot of our advocacy has been, but it's been through this lens of sustainability, because many childcare providers closed their doors this past year. Many will not open again. And those of us who are continuing to be open and sustain our programs are needing to look not just to our service delivery with the families that we currently serve, but how are we going to address the service gap that is broader in community? And as it was mentioned, I'm part of a coalition that's been forming in South King County around addressing the child care gap in South King County, and they've been looking to Seattle to understand, like, what have you done to sustain your program, so then that, and how can we replicate those efforts in South King County? And so the landscape has shifted, and also surfaced quite a bit that have been buried in the past, wasn't prioritized in the past. It's been resurfaced through the pandemic.
Does anybody else, or does any of the other panelists, would they like to share their experience, thoughts?
I would just add that we did a really inclusive process prior to me being part of the legislature that led to the bill this year. But it's not only in the Children, Youth, and Families Committee, but the Finance Committee that the promise of that policy is possible. And let me be clear, like, the landscape of childcare across Washington state, quite frankly, is extraordinarily uneven. There's lots of areas that lost huge amounts, detrimental amounts of childcare in the pandemic. It is not lost on me that most of our childcare providers in Washington state are person of color owned and or women-owned businesses, which also means, what is that collateral damage on the ecosystem of our economy? One lesson that the pandemic has taught us that we cannot forget is that childcare is an infrastructure that is absolutely necessary for our economy to thrive. End stop, period. Our economy cannot do what it needs to do. We cannot have dollars moving through our communities. We cannot have jobs. We cannot have anything we have without childcare. And for me, that lens is paramount, because everything else about the economy that has that sort of awareness, government supplements and make sure it happens everywhere. And we need to have that mindset when it comes to childcare, because it shouldn't be inconsistent, because everyone needs it. It is something needed in every corner of the state and in every family and every community that has a child at some point in the rearing of that child. So I just want us to continue. I want us to rebuild from the pandemic, that build back better, but building back better is about really standing on the truth of what we were at deficit of before the pandemic started. So everything Dr. Griffin said, and in policy and resources, we have to double down. And that's why it's so wonderful to have folks like Brianna Jackson in the philanthropic spaces, right? It's going to take private dollars, public dollars, and philanthropic dollars combined to build that consistency that Dr. Griffin so eloquently articulated about what's possible if we really all go all in on it. So I'm excited about that vision. I'm excited that we as a legislature took a first step in what implementation is going to look like, but it's the first step of a walk that I hope we do fairly quickly, but get on going on.
Yeah, I mean, again, not sort of much to add to already the brilliance that's been shared. I think I had very similar reactions that Dr. Griffin did and Representative Harris-Talley did to this sort of this question. And if you saw me, Representative Harris-Talley, I was like nodding furiously when you were talking about sort of really economic growth and talking about economic sustainability in this state. And I was like, yes, we cannot sort of separate the two, right? That it's, well, here's an economic issue, here's a social issue over here in regards to childcare. It's so connected, and families, if they do not have care that they have access to, that they can afford and that they trust, they cannot go to work. Therefore, they cannot put back into the economy. And we're just on this, really harmful cycle, right? And not supporting families. So all I guess I would add is just to say that it really is crucial that as we think about, right, the wins that we've had in the legislative session, that it's so important when we talk about implementation, that we're really not missing the fact that part of that implementation has to be centered around those doing the work, those who have been lifting up families and children across the state throughout this, year and a half, almost 2 years of the pandemic, of those who have been there for families when they've been struggling, there for families when they have been going through sort of mental health issues. And so really centering them, because we cannot implement anything without the providers, without having providers that have access to, well-equipped facilities, and providers that have workers that, again, can live on wages. So it's like so key right now to be in this conversation today. And as we look forward to the exciting things around implementation, but it's like we have to make sure that they are not only being centered, but like providers and families' experiences are part of the decision-making process. So
I have nothing to add. I'm just going to invite Brianna to just mic drop. That was really beautiful, all of you. I mean, I essentially just wanted to ditto everything that you all said. And I also know that that community sort of engagement process that you were just talking about, Brianna, and centering those who are providers and children, like to talk to children about like childcare or the types of programs that they want to be in, or talking to families about the kind of childcare access needs that they have is powerful. And our campaign has been engaged in that since, September, really. And folks have lifted up everything that Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley said about, we need spaces where we can talk to someone who speaks our language, right, who is culturally aware. We need to be able to have additional slots for families. We know about the shortage. We need to be able to have workers that, get fair wages, that are able to stay, so that I can have the same provider that my kid has been exposed to since he or she, or they were 3, right? And so many folks have lifted up everything that I've been sort of talking about on the campaign trail. And I think once, elected, because I'm going to manifest it, I can't wait to be able to help leverage budgets, right? And to be able to partner more deeply with our elected officials at the state level to think through, like, what does it look like at the local level, at the state level, even, you know, potentially childcare infrastructure has been a talking point of Senator Sanders, and others have been lifting that conversation up. And so hopefully there'll be deeper investments from Congress as well.
Thank you, ladies. You know, I definitely love the fact that it was brought up about the change in the loss when it comes with students, especially when it comes with the landscape and it's constantly changing. I think when you see an area that does so bad and someone comes in to gentrify it, everything about that particular area, the authenticity, the just everything just goes away. And, you know, including childcare. So it's just like you forget about the kids, you forget about helping them grow, succeed, and get to where they want to be. And I truly think that all those things that you ladies mentioned is super important that we are capturing, and that we are recognizing the different approaches, the whole child approach, the whole family approach, staff approach. It's super important because those are constantly changing within the current landscape of childcare as well. All right. My final question for you ladies is, what do you see on the horizon for equitable access to childcare and the education of students over the next 3 years? Dr. Olow, will you share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, happy to, Taj. Appreciate the question. I mean, I think on the horizon is more, you know, leaders and elected officials or candidates who understand this landscape, who run for office because they see that childcare is an economic development issue, is a housing issue, is a transportation issue, is an access to jobs issue, right? I hope that there's an opportunity for more moms running for office, more parents who understand the complexity and the nuances of this issue running for office. I also know that there's an opportunity to expand, right? One of the I guess sort of bright spots of COVID is that it has daylighted deep disparities that folks have been talking about for decades, and access to childcare is one of those deep disparities. And so with that, I'm hoping that there's an opportunity to invest deeply to make sure that our families have not only access, but utilization of these services. And I think, you know, finally, just a closer, you know, look of the workforce, right? When we sort of unpack the childcare workforce, many of the workers are immigrant refugee women, women of color in particular, Black women. And so when we talk about workforce equity or worker, you know, pay equity, these are deeply connected issues. And I think it's an equity issue for us to be as we're talking about access for families, to also be talking about supports for the people that are holding up our families.
Does any of the other panelists would like to add to this discussion?
Well, of course, I really appreciate the highlighting the opportunity to expand. And I mean, it's been a couple of decades that we've seen families move out, particularly families of color and children who are already furthest away from educational and social justice, moving further south in King County. And there's a need, there's a gap. I meet every 2 weeks with several legislators and community leaders in South King County area. And we've been looking at what the gap is in the South King County area as it relates to childcare. And there are several family home providers, but very few center providers or school-based providers. And there's been a need identified for that opportunity and access for our families south of Seattle. And so I think, there needs to be more around data collection and feasibility studies and outreach to communities to understand what that need and gap is. And we're trying to figure out where to start and how to move that work forward. Most definitely.
I would just say that innovations are already happening in so many ways. So many childcare providers, whether institutional providers like Launch or in-home providers, have been working to find the models of care that really meet folks' needs. I think the future will continue to look as diverse as our communities look, with what Dr. Griffin said, the very real impacts of displacement and where our families are has shifted very dramatically. I'm looking forward to the census data at the end of this year. We're going to have a clear picture of what that looks like, because I know for the 37th district, so many Black, Brown, and working class families have been displaced. I was just talking to a neighbor the other day, talking about that they're planning to move their mosque because so many people have to travel such long distances now. But the other things, right, like the models of outdoor playgrounds, we had a couple years policy in place to see if that would work. This year we cemented that is a model. Now, anywhere in Washington state, someone can choose to do outdoor engaged childcare options, something no one would even talk about a decade ago. So it takes time for policy to catch up, again, to community. But what I'm seeing is the vision folks have had of what it is to have flexibility, openness, and let community build the childcare that works for them. We have the promise and ability to do that right now. And I'm excited at how that vision is going to continue expand. And I'm just going to be working with every elected official at every level of government for policy and us decision makers to try to keep pace with you all as you continue to see what our children need and how you take care of your teams while you're doing it and how we show up to help you do it better.
This is great. I'm trying to think what to add. I love that innovation is happening right now. I love that. So I totally would agree. I think we're going to continue to see, more broad support from business community around this issue. I think we're going to see organizations like Launch moving even more deeply into the advocacy space. I think in having greater influence on policy. I think we are going to see, more the folks that are impacted the most by these policy decisions driving decision making. And I hope to see that, when it comes to really family engagement and connections, it's not going to be a nice to have anymore. It's going to be a necessity. It's going to be, this is what we got to do to, again, support kids and support families. And there will be more accountability for how this is or is not happening around that space. So yeah, I agree. I think innovation is happening now and we're seeing it. I, for one, have been in this work and been in this field for many years. I mean, really most of my young adult life into my 40s now, and it's amazing to really see the changes that are happening right in front of us. And I think that, again, seeing the fruition of a lot of hard work, dreams, really coming to the forefront. So I'm excited about what's on the horizon, and I hope that we again use this time and use this moment to do something better and build something better, and not be okay anymore with the status quo that has been so harmful to so many of our families in this field. So I'm really hopeful.
One other thing I want to add is that I think we have become braver, more courageous, bolder, even more innovative around dismantling racism in our communities, but really more specifically in the work that we're doing with children and helping to develop a generation of young people who are not going to settle. They're not going to settle with the injustices and the inequities that so many of us have had to live through for a long time. And that's exciting to think about and see that possibility. And I mean, it's showing up in our curriculum, our anti-bias curriculums that we're using with our children. In our programs at Launch, we partnered with the school district around the Black Lives curriculum, using the Black Lives curriculum with our children. We're talking about inclusiveness, but then also helping them practice, being inclusive with their friends and to see their whole communities and lift each other up and have compassion. I'm really hopeful. I'm really hopeful for the generation that we're building collectively as a community. You said build back better, Representative Harris-Talley, most definitely.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies. So we are going to allow our fabulous audience to ask any questions for our panel. So for our attendees, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to drop them in the chat now. And then Doria will read them off. Come on, I know you're out there. Don't be shy. Really? No one doesn't have a question for our panelists?
People are processing.
Let's see.
People are processing.
It can be anything, y'all. Our favorite color, what we're gonna have for dinner tonight. Don't be shy.
I have a question. I'm curious. Representative Harris-Talley, you were talking about the recent legislation that's passed around, and I know that it's going to require some sustainability of funding because it was written into statute, and it's going to require some funding stability. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. And it's a great question. And it's a great question because Washington State has the most regressive, it's an aggressively regressive tax code in the entire country, which means we are a state that has almost more millionaires per capita outside of a couple states than any other state in the nation. Yet we are underfunding almost every level of basic need. And we know when we add a lens of racial or class equity, the deficits get even deeper. This year, I felt like was a really amazing turning point with the conversation of what state-based revenue and consistency in revenue looks like, but on two levels. One, the makeup of the Finance Committee, which is the committee that makes those decisions. I have the pleasure of serving on that committee. We have an extraordinarily progressive chair. For folks who follow legislative policy nerds like me, Representative Noelle Frame from the 36th District, who is over many years, well before she was a legislator, really focused on not only do we have to raise revenue, it's about who we're raising that revenue from. And so those kind of that was the setting and tone of the conversations this year. Capital gains passed this year was the first major progressive revenue reform we've had in quite a long time. And for folks who don't know, capital gains is when money makes money. So you have some stock or options, you sell it to get the money out. We never taxed that. And that is a type of transaction that happens quite a lot in Washington State, but as individuals and corporations, because a lot of people have assets wrapped up in money that makes money. So that was a game changer. But what was also the game changer is that we invested those dollars not in K-12 education directly, but in our education fund, which is actually a broad fund that lets us as a state invest as early as preschool. So a lot of childcare infrastructure we know also overlaps with our preschool infrastructure for our communities, but also through what it is to have worker retraining on the other side, and continuation of education, which for me, when I think about childcare, is also the folks providing the care. So when I think about where those dollars are going and how a lens of how those dollars are stewarded and who has access of those funds, it's not an insignificant amount of money. It's $400 million. And yet we know we'll need more in the dedicated space. So that is to say, I'm optimistic about the direction we took as a legislature this year. We have many other progressive revenue options. And also, I am not alone in wanting to have conversations about B&O tax structures and other business structures around revenue reform, because at the end of the day, these are small, not even small, mom and pop size businesses, right? Most childcare providers have less than 10 employees. And so what that looks like for us, making sure there's a structure for what taxation and things look like so that these mom and pop size businesses can thrive in that is also some of the consideration we need to have as a state. So I'm optimistic that we're moving at the right direction and have the right folks in leadership positions to keep the focus on, we've been under-resourcing and we need to make sure that we adequately and build for innovative moments in the future. You need dollars to make life happen. So the role of government in that is big. We're the only institution large enough to make huge amounts of change at the speed that we can when we choose to make decisions. So I hope we continue in that direction. And I hope we continue to have the focus on children and families as we think about how to spend those dollars.
Thank you, Representative Harris-Talley. All right. So I'm going to jump to the next question that we have in the chat. It's from Beverly Cashino. What can advocates without young children do to keep that momentum of change going? Who would like to answer this question?
Happy to start us off. I mean, I would probably say, Beverly, to continue, emailing and staying engaged with your local, elected officials, to continue to elevate this conversation of access to childcare at all levels of government, not just at the state level, and also to support candidates who are running on these issues so that you not only have an ally when elected, but a thought partner.
Thank you.
I know there's going to be opportunities with how the policy was written for childcare at the state level, where there's going to be regional and local groups coming together, making some decisions about local implementation. So I just want to echo what Shukri just said, right? We're in the midst right now of, for most of us, election cycles that are going to determine who's in those decisions in representation, but also we have built policy to have community voice. And the other thing I want to note is we had the first remote session in Washington state history at the state level, which also means we had remote testimony. We had a 300% increase in community over lobbyist voice in testimony and committee work. So I want to tell every person here, some of the most transformational testimony I heard was in Children, Youth, and Families Committee. Childcare providers, right there in the middle of their workday, didn't have to take a full day off work to come give me testimony, could sit there in their classroom, the kids playing in the background, and tell us what they needed in real time. So I encourage anyone who cares about that democratic voice, let your elected official know at the state level you really liked that and that we should keep remote testimony. I found it transformational in the voices we got to hear as we were making decisions. And I want to keep those kind of tools, and hearing from our neighbors is how we make sure it's not just us as elected officials, but folks know community wants that. So please, please make it heard that the innovations of access with pandemic, some of those tools we can keep because they were silver linings that are now the way we should be doing the work.
Yep, and I'm going to add giving of your time and your treasure. So where you have time to volunteer, do that. Where you have resources to share, then share them, and it will all come back to you beautifully.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from Laura Nicholson. Hi, Laura. As we move back into the traditional education landscape, what are some of the best ways for childcare to agitate and advocate that the system wasn't working? And panelists, if you need to see the question, you can find it in the Q&A section of your Zoom.
Yeah, I like that, agitate and advocate. I think we did a lot of that this past legislative session, but it just doesn't stop because it was a budget year, right? Like we have to continue to do that advocating and agitating. I'd say for those of us working, like Launch is in Seattle Public Schools, and so we are needing to hold the school district's feet to the fire to make sure that they are looking to be strong community partners with us, that they're continuing to include us in decision making around the children that we're both serving throughout the day, and that where there's opportunity for expansion of early learning slots and resources, that we're able to push for that growth as well, because it's just there continues to be limited resources from a perspective of subsidizing and supporting families who can't afford the high cost of early learning care in most centers.
Yeah, and I would just say, yeah, do that agitation work in collaboration with others, right? Because there's strength in numbers. So I think some of the really great stuff that Launch has been doing, honestly, with just coming together with other providers to really just amplify the voice. And it sounds really great that it sounds like there was some great sort of power and testimony that Representative Harris-Talley was sharing. So I hope maybe even remote options will continue to be a choice, because it sounds like that's really powerful in being able to tell that story. Just really, I think the storytelling is so powerful, and doing that in numbers, right? Because people listen, when we're hearing it from multiple voices.
That's a great point. And I was just going to add a thought about sort of expanding that communication loop as well within the childcare sector. I know there's different demographic groups, right, who are engaged in like social media platforms, or I actually figured out a way to infiltrate a Somali childcare providers WhatsApp group. But there's lots of different spaces where coalitions are being built and conversations are being had. And the Fair Starts for Kids Act was actually part of like this WhatsApp communication that I was, listening in on, and was able to kind of understand, folks' opinions and thoughts about what was happening at the state level. And so for childcare providers, yes, there's strength in numbers, but there's also an opportunity to create spaces where, it's more communal, where it's not by, this ethnic group or this racial group or this whatever group that has access to whatever knowledge is sort of sharing in. What does that broad sort of connection look like across the sector that brings together kinship providers and family in-home childcare providers and, folks who have facilities and, organizations like Launch to be able to build toward collective liberation? Because I feel like that's what you're all engaged in, right? It's not just about educating children, but like, what's the so what, right? So that they're liberated. And I think there's definitely more room to create that level of partnership for sure.
I love that collective liberation. Something else I was thinking about is that for so long, our leaders of our child care programs have been like head down in operations, right? Like focused on making sure that we, have our kids are being served with, our high quality, and the numbers and the curriculum and the food gets there. And I mean, even in the pandemic, I was listening to providers that were driving up and down I-5 trying to figure out where toilet tissue was and sharing. But what that led to was us all coming together collectively and looking more outward to understand what it is we need to do to make sure that we're better supported as a sector as a whole. And that work has been a long time coming, right? And so what we're needing in that agitation space is for there to be more allies outside of our childcare programs who will take that on. Because the reality is most of our child care providers, our organizations, have small numbers of leadership staff who need to be hands-on and engaged and again supporting the operations, and we don't all have internal infrastructure to have the time to go out and advocate or to raise dollars or to join a Zoom meeting with our legislators. For many of our providers, that time and resource is very, very limited.
Thank you, ladies. All right, and our last question is, what can and should our public school systems be doing to partner with child care providers and their advocates?
Do you want to start this one, Dr. Griffin, with the model you all are doing?
I was getting ready to. Yes, most definitely. So in Seattle Public Schools, we have a community alignment agreement, and that's where for each school building that has a child care program, whether that be early learning or out of school time learning, there's an agreement that we will share space mainly. What we're working towards now, because there's several of us providers who have come together and expressed the need for a stronger partnership, is we're actually working to go back a little ways to when there was an alignment that was more centered on children's outcomes, and that partnership being stronger around our kids being able to achieve the academic goals that they have, to have better family and parent engagement in the school day and beyond, and then to share more resources besides the space. Right. And that's going to be a work in progress, probably over several years. But the conversation is being had because several of us childcare providers came together and had a collective voice to say to our school district that we need stronger partnership, we need greater resources, we need better alignment. And my hope is that we'll see that model beyond Seattle Public Schools, right? That we will set the example as to what that could look like broader. But within Seattle specifically, we need stronger partnership, stronger alignment, more shared resources in this community.
I'll tell you about a vision I have of what this could look like. And I say this because of the experience I know some families in the 37th district experienced when, to Dr. Griffin's example, right, often it's about the actual amount of space needed to accommodate additional programs. And this is a shortage that not only Seattle Public Schools is experiencing, but many public schools across our state. And that we're in facilities that are 50, 70, even 30 years old. And the concentration and growth that every one of our communities has had is exponential. So I have a vision that we actually start structuring policy for all the new buildings that are going to be expanded, because there's a number of local levies and state dollars invested, that we actually start looking at census-based data and expanding those buildings beyond the current capacity of students. That kind of vision of change will change the ratio of the number of spaces and the number of communities that can even think about doing partnerships. And I say that because our laws are very prescriptive about how much space has to be allowed, what access is allowed at those facilities. And that's all about safety of workers and the children and their families. But it's butting up against the very real shortage of the infrastructure that we have within our school system. So we need to reconcile that, because I do think the pandemic showed us the interface within our public schools. I mean, anywhere in Seattle, you didn't even have to have a child in school, but you could get a meal at our public schools. You could get a vaccine schedule at our public schools. It was a hub for the community in so many ways. And that is something I also don't want our memories to lose as we come on the other side of the pandemic. We can build these collaborations intentionally before groundbreaking. So that's what I want, because I was blessed to be at a school that didn't lose the launch program, but many of our neighbors did. And I know how hard that was for you all in the decision making, as well as the reality of the policy came into the constraints of these buildings. So we have some work to do to vision that into policy that really works.
I'd love to just add that, as long as we have leaders like Dr. Griffin and Brianna Jackson and Taj and Representative Kirsten Harris-Talley, I think this field is in good hands, right? There'll be plenty of opportunity to kind of work through these issues of partnership, because you have folks that are committed to it. And so really grateful for all the work that you all do.
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, I think it's incredible work that folks are doing every day to build these partnerships and build spaces for children and families. And we know that it's been really difficult, right? Just in the midst of the pandemic. But I am hopeful too that because of the experiences that we had, that those community hubs will grow. And I think that sort of values and beliefs that we have around sort of what makes up a school community or what makes up a community will continue to shift. and encompass, right, all the wonderful, community partners that we have taking care of our kids. And so, I think that Launch plays a vital role in that. And so I'm really hopeful to see that, excited to hear that there could be some work being done sort of at the beginning to sort of anticipate needs of communities. So yeah, I'm so grateful for everyone that's just doing such hard work really every day to show up for our kids and build those bridges and build those partnerships. And I know Launch has been working so diligently and so hard throughout this last 15, 16 months. Well, beyond that, let's be honest. But I mean, in the 16 months, really doing that to
almost 45
yeah,
years.
I was gonna say, let's be real. Yeah, 40 plus years. I mean, again, I think it's really beautiful because Launch has led the charge, right, in so many ways in that space. And so, and so many others too. So thankful for that.
Perfect. Well, thank you to our audience for providing such amazing questions. I am going to pass it off to Dr. Griffin to say some final words.
All right. Well, I just want to say I'm thankful for each of my fellow panelists that joined this evening. I know it was you took time. You took time to share and speak to community around the state of our childcare sector, and that's valuable. It's invaluable to know that you care so deeply. Even being parents yourself, launch parents in communities that neighbor our Seattle area. And I'm just very, very, very grateful. And as I said earlier, I'm so hopeful for our children as they're continuing to develop and grow into our future leaders, our future politicians and teachers and doctors and grocery store workers, wherever they end up, they're going to have a mindset that is going to be uniquely different and better for the society that is to come. So thank you for contributing to that growth and that development. All right, we're out. The sun's still out, so everyone can get out and go enjoy the sun for the rest of the evening. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.